reaction would be of horror, really. So now we think forward all this time, sushi bars are everywhere. There was even one in my small little tiny town of Kirksville when I went to college at Truman. So it's crazy how these food trends sweep over the nation and completely change the landscape of what we're eating. Today I'm going to talk about what the problem is with what we're eating and the food system, what the solution is, I think you can guess it, and how the economics of this industry work. All right, so in 2050, we're going to have about 10 billion people on this earth. And this poses huge problems with our finite resources. To produce our food, it takes 284 gallons of oil that one cow eats in their feed, because the fertilizers that are being put on this feed are oil-based. 12% of all methane emissions are from our livestock just here in the US. For 1 pound of beef, it requires 1,800 gallons of water, and 260 million acres of US forests have been cleared to grow our livestock. So these are significant resources for our current protein that most Americans consume. We also have further challenges with the way that our conventional protein is produced. 75% of US meat processing plants have discharged into the waterway system more than what they were supposed to. And then also, there was almost 2,000 pounds of nitrogen dumped into the river each day in Illinois by a slaughterhouse. And this was reported by the Environmental Integrity Project. Another challenge to the way food is produced, our food, is that we continue to increase the amount of animal protein that we're consuming in the US and even around the world. So, in 2018, we reached an all-time high in the US of meat-based consumption. Now, the good news is that beef, which is the most resource-intensive, is slowly declining, or pretty much steady. And then chicken, though, it has increased 5 times since 1970. And so, overall, meat consumption has increased here in the US, but also around the world, this is becoming a trend. And it's due to increasing socioeconomic statuses, so as more people enter the middle class and emerging markets, they are starting to adopt this meat-eating practice. And then there's also the protein trend. So decades ago, the fad was a high-carb diet, and now people are realizing the health benefits of additional protein into our diet. And so the trend has been for quite some time now to get more and more protein into our diets. There's another challenge. It's not just meat-based protein that's on the rise. So you would think that people are substituting their plants for meat, but also plant-based proteins are on the rise. So protein in general, it just keeps increasing. And 39% of US consumers are adding more plant-based foods to their diet. They're doing it for health reasons, and again, because they're looking to increase their protein intake. But we're getting about 14% of the American population who are actually doing it for sustainability. which is small, but it's growing, and the sustainability foods movement is projected to rise up through, the projections I've seen were through 2024. So that is the good news. And the solution to all of these challenges could lie in swapping some or a good portion of our proteins to insects. There are more than 1,900 edible insect species on the earth. And in fact, hundreds of these are already being consumed around the world. So grasshoppers are big in Mexico. Crickets are kind of the epicenter of Thailand. And in the Scandinavian countries, they're even starting to eat a lot of mealworms, which is cool. I really like mealworms, but they're tough to market.
Because crickets are easy.
Crickets are easy, yeah, exactly. So this is one of my favorite slides to show. And this one is definitely something worthy of tagging us on social media. It's just the breakdown of gallons of water it requires to produce 1 pound of beef, pig, chicken. Require 1,800 times less water than do beef, and then 12 times less grain. And then 100 times, they emit 100 times fewer carbon greenhouse gases than beef does. And then you can see the comparison between pig and chicken. What's not on here is, that I just started researching, is soy, nuts, and milk. So just from my initial research, it can be challenging to measure these quantities because data measures this consumption in different ways. But my initial research shows that it requires 2,000 gallons of water to produce a gallon of milk. And you're thinking, well, I drink almond milk, so that's okay. Almond milk requires 4,000 gallons of water. So this almond milk craze that we're on right now is really taxing to California, where most of the almonds are grown. It requires, each almond, one little almond requires 1.1 gallons of water to produce. And so California's, they already have a water crisis, so this is further taxing that. And then soy estimates are in the hundreds too. So if you look at that from water alone, crickets just completely blow the water issue out of the water. What else did I want to say about this? I think that's about it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So pounds of CO2, that's fine, but methane is way worse, and certainly the pigs and cows are making a whole lot of methane. Is that a byproduct of cricketdom? Do they have a digestion system that generates methane?
Yeah, just a tiny little bit.
Well, they are tiny, so that helps.
Yeah. So I believe the CO2 emissions for the cricket includes methane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know if that would be with the cow too? In that row?
I'll have to research that.
I just asked because methane is way worse than CO2.
Right.
They're usually calculated on carbon equivalent.
No, okay.
Normally when these numbers are given out, it's all of those gases.
I think it's a summation of all of the greenhouse gases, but I'll have to double check on that number.
I'll go with Aaron.
Okay. The other cool thing about crickets specifically is that they are incredibly nutrient dense. More complete protein than beef. And I say complete just to emphasize that crickets have all the 9 essential amino acids that our bodies don't naturally produce so that we can synthesize muscle. More iron than spinach, and this is all by weight. more calcium than milk, more fiber than peas, as many omega-3s as salmon, which blows my mind that you can get omega-3s from crickets. You don't have to turn to seafood, which has become a very dirty industry, to get your omega-3s. And a latest study suggests that crickets also serve as a prebiotic. So that's the interesting thing, is that we view insects as dirty. And there was a movement in the first half of the 1900s to purify our food. So we started really refining our flour, bleaching it, and we refined our sugar, making it white. And a premium price was charged on that, right? To have this pure food. And now it's kind of the opposite. Sugar on the raw and unbleached flour is more expensive. And you're like, what the heck? I'm saving you a step. But it's all what they can get out of marketing. So now that we're starting to understand that our food, like having this like really pure food, is not so healthy, it could help our culture shift to be able to one day accept or widespread the consumption of insects. And so the fact that insects are in our food already probably helps our digestive system. So the USDA allows a certain percentage of insects to be in our food. If you weren't already aware, in peanut butter and chocolate, anything that was processed. So if we increase that, we can actually help the gut bacteria that Americans really struggle with. We really struggle with gut bacteria compared to other countries that have dirtier food. So why did I specifically choose crickets for my company? It was because they're just easier sounding to digest. But there are other insects that are really great in terms of energy efficiency. So mealworms versus crickets, these are the top two insects that are currently being explored in the United States. And crickets is definitely number one. Mealworms, very few companies are exploring insects, but mealworms is definitely not very popular. But 100% of the mealworm is edible compared to 80% of the cricket, which is cool. They are more energy efficient than crickets are. And the only thing is that mealworms have less protein content than crickets. So crickets have a more complete ratio of those amino acids. So for animal feed, they're starting to explore ways to supplement animal feed with mealworms. It's a lot quicker to grow mealworms, a little bit easier, less taxing. But they have to add a little bit else to it to supplement that their nutrients that are in the mealworms. Well, I know that the wings we don't eat, but one thing that we're doing is harvesting the cricket before it fully develops its wings. So that's and then with these type of industry, as the industry evolves, we're going to become more efficient in the way crickets are raised, produced. So yeah. It's really hard to read that up there, but the part of the solution too will be making consumer-friendly products. I am not going to be at any foreseeable future making a product with a whole insect. It's just not something that Americans are going to be adopting in the near future. But what they can stomach is food that looks just like normal food. So I currently make oatmeal and cricket waffles, and I just powder the cricket and then blend it in so that it's really seamless. Since we're already eating insects, this is just another, it's just like normal food, except there's just a little bit more of the insects content in the food. But there was a marketing study that showed that gave consumers some information about the cricket and the health benefits, and then it just gave them like a get them before it's gone picture of people like grabbing all of these insects, and the study was showing which one drew a greater response in terms of I want to have that, and it was the latter, the one that was get them before they're gone. So that shows that these traditional marketing tactics of driving on that fear of missing out could really move the needle in terms of consumption versus trying to do more of the education about, oh, but you're really helping the environment. Because remember, only 14% of Americans care about that in their purchase behavior, whereas 80+% of them are more doing it for health reasons. And FOMO is a very, very strong driver in people's behaviors. Yeah.
I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but I swear at one point I read that in places in Asia, in India, for example, where diets are vegetarian and they're eating a lot of pulses and grains that have de facto insects in them just because food attracts insects,
Right.
that a lot of those people are getting their protein needs actually because they're eating insects in their food.
Yeah.
And are we also, whenever and I just don't know, I mean, you can either say, oh yeah, I can confirm or not, but when we buy processed product, isn't there always a chance that there's like a little bit of ground up something?
Yeah, there is. And the USDA has a maximum.
Mice and
Yes,
all
yeah.
sorts of good
Small-
stuff that might be
small
on this
ones.
quick that we don't want to acknowledge or think about. Generally, we just, serve it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. There is, and but the more refined the grain is, the more those get weeded out. So there was a study, and I tried to research so I can tell you about it with specific detail of what this group was, but I couldn't find it earlier today. But this population was eating grains, and it was a heavily grain diet. And then they moved to a different region of the world where they were getting flour that was more refined, and then they started having all of these health issues. And they discovered that it was because the insects that were being ground in the flour were starting to be milled out. So, crickets or insects definitely help supplement our food. So, because it's already happening, it's like, well, why not just do it in greater numbers so that we can begin to develop a more sustainable food system? But it's all psychological, right? So that's why part of the solution is going to be developing these gourmet-looking foods, rather than what I'm getting tired of is the image of the person with the scary bug, like eating for the shock effect, and that's not really what's going to cause someone to try and eat this insect. It's going to be more of the visual stimulation first. So this is a prototype that I made myself. It's the cricket cornflake, and it's just another idea I have of a way to start incorporating insects into our diet in a way that's not going to scare us. And the whole idea is to turn the ick factor into the wow factor. The industry right now is in the education phase, at least in the U.S. and in Europe, the U.S., Canada, and Europe. But 2 billion people around the world already consume insects. At least. I've seen reports that said up to 80% of the world eats insects, so the numbers seem to be a little bit all over the map. But we know that a lot of people are already eating insects. The U.S. market in 2017 reached $2 million. Woohoo! But in 2018, its projected numbers haven't come in yet that I saw, but it's estimated to have reached $8 million. So it's growing. And the cool thing is the market rate is projected at an average growth of 55% through 2024. And then globally, the market is expected to reach 1.5 billion in 2021. That was one figure, and these estimates that I've seen have ranged pretty greatly, but that's about an average. So overall, there's great potential in this industry. The cool thing is that US, Europe, and Canada are the fastest growing markets. And that's pretty much because those are the markets that haven't been historically consuming insects, so it's really easy to grow quickly when you don't have any precedent. But the other thing that I really realized through my travels last year backpacking Asia is that other countries truly look to the US for food trends. And that is one of the reasons why so many countries are consuming more protein, is because the craze started really in the US and other countries are adopting US diets. So when I was in Japan, I was blown away in Tokyo when I found out that most people in their 20s and early 30s don't even eat white rice. And their grandparents just like can't understand, why are you not eating rice? But it's because they're looking to the US and seeing that the US is eating brown rice and they're eating whole grains. So people are starting to reject these foods that they know have a really high glycemic index. So if the US starts to become a leader in the edible insects industry, we have the potential to be a really great example for other countries and truly change the market.
Are you going to spend more time on the market? Can I ask a question about it? I don't want to preempt any of your slides. Are there major players, of course that's in quotation marks when your market cap is at 7 million, but are there major players in this industry? And I ask because I was contacting somebody that lives in Montana about your presentation, just to advertise it more. And she said, "Oh, we have cowboy cricket over here. They're in Bosman." And so it seems like there's several instances of kind of the local cricket company. Mm-hmm. Is there a cricket company that has crossed kind of the regional boundaries and they're the big player in the industry?
Or a BASF?
There's, what's ADM?
Archer Daniel Midland. It's the mega food producers of the ones that brought us that bleached flour and then decided they'll charge us more for the non-bleached.
Yeah, there's an Edible Insects Alliance. What's the acronym? NACIA or something. The major players right now, the biggest one is Exo, which was acquired last year for $5 million by Aspire Foods. So that was our first acquisition in the industry. Chapul is one of the top players. So Exo and Chapul both do cricket bars, and then Chirps does chips. Chapul and Chirps are more known because they were both featured on Shark Tank. And then there are several like bigger cricket farms around that, and those are really it so far.
And is it like an East Coast, West Coast thing? Like, is there regionalization within just the United States? Especially just knowing your slide right here. If I was in Philadelphia, would I have a better chance of being able to get my cricket bar at the local grocery store than in St. Louis, for example?
I'm not sure about Philadelphia
It's an example, just like, East Coast-ness.
Yeah. West Coast definitely has the biggest players. And really food trends, this is the way food trends work, is they start on the coast in restaurants. So in like San Francisco Central LA and New York, chefs will start incorporating these foods. And insects, true to the way food trends work, showed up first in New York several years ago in restaurants. And then it starts creeping on the coast to maybe some CPG, and then consumer packaged goods, and then it makes its way into the middle of the U.S. However, interestingly, while there are the biggest companies are on the coast, I am starting to meet more and more companies in this space that are here in the Midwest. And I think it's because the Midwest is such an agriculture landscape. So we do have a cricket farm here in St. Louis and Fenton that very few people know about. But they are the first one here in St. Louis, and I'm the first cricket food brand here in St. Louis. So yeah, that's the way food trends work. The other interesting thing about food trends is right now, Asian food is hot. So Asian food has been growing at about a rate of 135% in the U.S., which is higher than pizza. And this was study was conducted by restaurants growth. This was higher than pizza and chicken and other ethnic foods. So there's been this Asian sensation happening. And that's another reason why I chose crickets, is because crickets are popular in Thailand. And so Americans are already starting to be very intrigued by that issue, and their tourism has grown exponentially from the U.S. And so that itself can help drive the industry here in the United States. I think that might be all of my slides. Yeah. So, questions?
How much does a pound of the crickets cost to buy?
A pound right now is going for about $35. It's pretty pricey, and that's because of economies of scale. We don't have very many players here, and so as more cricket farms enter the market, we're going to get more efficient in the way that we do things.
What makes it so expensive?
We are doing everything as a baby, and when you're operating as a baby, you don't have the economies of scale you gain when you have mass quantities that you're dealing with. So like my costs for oats, because I'm buying just 50-pound bags versus tons, are much higher than would be like Quaker oats. Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you arrived at this venture?
How I derived here? It started about 5 years ago. I learned about cricket protein as I was doing research. Well, first I was watching Shark Tank, and I saw a cricket bar, Chapul, and I was like, wait, what is this? So I started doing research, and I was like, this is the protein I've been looking for. It's super sustainable. I could feel good eating it, because crickets, the way that they're raised and harvested, mimic their natural life cycle. So I'm not eating sick animals. I'm eating very healthy animals, and the way that they're harvested is also not increasing the amount of hormones that are flooding their bodies at the very end of their life. And the way that they're harvested, I'll just go walk you through the life cycle of the cricket, because I get that asked a lot, or how are crickets grown at these farms. There's a giant warehouse, and in the warehouse there are rows and rows of shelves of giant Tupperware bins, very sophisticated here. And in the bins are these little cricket condos that are made out of like egg cartons that are stacked on top of each other. So the crickets can hop around, and they're fed chicken feed. And they're raised for 6 weeks, and then right before they start developing their wings, they're harvested. And they're harvested by being frozen. So all the live ones hop up into another container. The ones that have passed away are not consumed. And so then they're frozen and they go into what's called torpor. And this is a kind of hibernation that happens when they're out in the wild and it starts to get cold. So the life of a cricket in nature is going to be about 12 weeks. And so when they get cold, they go into hibernation, and then after a full 24 hours, they're finally dead. Now, if you thaw that cricket before the 24 hours, it can come back to life. So it's really important that that cricket is fully frozen for a good amount of time, because these are hardy creatures. And then they're cleaned by blanching and roasted and then powdered. So a very smooth process that really, like, you can grow so many crickets or mealworms in such a small space. And people even, mealworms are easier to grow, so there are a few people who just grow their own mealworms in their own house. Just like you have a garden, people grow their mealworms. You can do that with crickets too.
Yeah, people do that when they have reptiles to feed.
Yes, yeah. So my brothers used to have crickets. They were doing it for a science experiment, but they were pretty easy. You just gotta make sure that they're warm, kept warm. What else was in this? I don't remember. Anyway, so I discovered that it was the protein for me, and then I was like, well, how come no one else is, like, people in the U.S. aren't eating this? If I'm interested in this and it meets all of my needs, and I'm talking to people about how they're getting tired of consuming soy and how dairy is, making them feel funny, and organic meat is too expensive. Maybe if we can get more people eating insects, then the price can really drop, because just the sheer input quantity of like water, feed, and land space, just the economics make it a no-brainer that this, when the market grows, is going to be so much cheaper than other alternative protein sources.
So what form do you buy it? I assume you buy it from the farm?
Yeah, I do right now. I source both whole crickets and powdered crickets. The whole crickets, I'm experimenting with powdering myself, and I also roast them whole and eat them whole, because I've since progressed to doing that. But it took me quite a while to do that, like a year before I was brave enough to try a whole cricket. And as long as I don't look at it, I don't have any like freak out. But it's really just land shrimp, it's land shrimp. And now, like,
That's exactly what it is.
yeah. And now when I am at like a Thanksgiving table, sometimes I get this freak out moment, like, holy cow, that's a chicken, or that's a turkey. I mean, it's like you see the leg, the wing, and we always talk about. People always say, "I don't want to see the leg of the cricket." I'm like, yeah, but you always see legs, or chicken legs, things like that. So it's funny how. And here's another analogy that I like to use is when we go out to a fancy seafood restaurant, people come bring the lobster, and it's like been stabbed down the middle. It's all spread out. The legs are like coming out, and the waiter puts it down, and we're all like, "Oh, that looks so good." And it's got antennas, and when you really think about it, it's like, does that really look good to us? But we're so trained, like, this is gourmet food, whereas in the 1800s, lobster was poor man's food. In New York, it was a pest, and then it got overfished. So I thought it would be fun to do a marketing campaign of having a little cricket, like, cut in half and like split open, and then like do a side by side with the lobster to try and like train people psychologically. Okay, it's really not a scary thing if we just shift our mindset. Yes.
So let's say I want to be a mighty cricket consumer. How do I go about doing that?
You can go to cricketcereal.com.
Okay.
But I also got on shelf at New Dawn. New Dawn Natural Market, which is by Tower Grove Park, and then next week I'm making my delivery to Local Harvest.
Oh.
Moving on up. Did you have a question, Lacey?
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
It sort of sounds like mealworms are like more cost effective, have more protein, or just better in every way. The only problem is like the egg factor, I guess, with raising them and selling them. I'm wondering, like, do you see yourself further down the line developing mealworm cereals or food products as well?
I do. And the crickets have higher protein and like more quality protein than mealworms. So that's the only reason why. That's the main difference. But I do see starting to incorporate mealworms into my products. Right now, they're just fewer mealworm farms. So, yeah.
Do you mind passing your products around so we can see
Sure.
what you've got there?
Yeah, so this is the pure cricket powder, so you can just see how it compares to how I just seamlessly
And then while you
blended
have them in hand, can you just kind of speak to what we should do with them?
Sure. So I have recipes on my website about the what you can make with the pure cricket protein powder. But basically, it's just like any other protein powder. You can blend it into smoothies and make protein shakes. I don't recommend just blending it with water because it's going to be kind of gritty and it's flavorless. So don't do that. Although I have had some very intense athletes say, oh, I'll just shut down, it'll be fine. This one is oatmeal. I have 3 oatmeal flavors. So that one's just like regular oatmeal. You add milk or water. And this one's pancake.
I've had the oatmeal. It's really good.
Yeah, this one's the pancake and waffle mix. Yep. So I will